People once believed that when someone dies, a crow carries their soul to the land of the dead. But sometimes, something so bad happens that a terrible sadness is carried with it, and the soul can't rest. Then sometimes, just sometimes, the crow can bring that soul back to put the wrong things right.
Brandon Lee was born on February 1st, 1965 in Oakland, California, who is the son of martial arts legend and movie star Bruce Lee and actress Linda Lee Caldwell. From an early age, Brandon learned martial arts from his father, Bruce Lee.
I started training with my dad really as soon as I could walk.
And lived between Hong Kong and the U.S. during his father's acting career. While visiting his father's sets, Brandon became interested in acting. Bruce Lee's sudden death in 1973 would leave a legacy that made Bruce an icon of martial arts and cinema. Despite growing up in the shadow of his father, Brandon found his own path in life and pursued a career in acting. Tragically, Brandon Lee's life was cut short on March 31st, 1993, during the filming of The Crow, in which his character is shot and killed. The Crow is a 1994 supernatural action film based on the comic book series of the same name. The movie stars Brandon Lee as Eric Draven, a rock musician who is murdered along with his fiancée. 1 year later, on Devil's Night, he is resurrected as the Crow and sets out to seek revenge on those responsible for his and his fiancée's death. In the scene, Brandon's character, Eric Draven, walks into his apartment and discovers his fiancée being attacked. One of the thugs, named Funboy, played by actor Michael Massey, fires a Smith & Wesson .44 Magnum revolver at Eric Draven as he walks into the room. 2 weeks before Brandon's final scene, there had been a dummy round loaded into the .44 Magnum revolver, which, being used as a prop gun, had created a real bullet being lodged in the barrel of that gun. Then, when using blank rounds in the same gun on March 31st, 1993, would dislodge the bullet, shooting Brandon in the abdomen.
These are different caliber dummy rounds that we have, and the whole goal to making dummy rounds is to make an imitation round that would lead the viewer to believe that it is a live round. So this is the dummy round, and this is the live round. Even though this is a dummy round and it's had the gunpowder removed, the primer hasn't been removed or struck. When we do a dummy round, it's always important to remove the primer cap from the center. What happened on The Crow was when they put the dummy round in, they forgot to remove the primer. And what happens is, again, that primer has enough force to dislodge the lead round and actually push it into the barrel. We're actually going to pull the trigger, and it'll have just enough force to lodge the round in there. So you can see in there our dummy round. We'll index it. 3, 2, 1. So just with that simple action, that little snap, the cap's gone off, no gunpowder, but what we'll be able to prove is the hung round inside the barrel. Inside that barrel, we have the obstruction. But if you look down the barrel, you'll notice that there's no light coming through. So that would tell me that there's an obstruction. In this case, a lead round, a hollow point. That's the one thing they didn't do. They didn't check the barrel for an obstruction. The problem with that is when you put a blank in there, then after whatever's in there, be it rock, dirt, or a hung round, that round comes out flying at 3,000 to 5,000 PSI. So when we're ready, I'll put a round in here. It's gonna be a blank, a half-load blank. This is it. There's no lead projectile. It's just crimped at the end, but it's got powder. The crimp's hot, but this produces enough powder to push this lead round into that board through 2 inches of plywood. So when we're ready, 3, 2, 1. The round's gone off. I can go check down range. And we can actually see the round that punctured through it. Right here. That's your round. That was the hung round that got pushed into the barrel with just the primer cap. And what you can see is, I don't know if you can see the striations, but it actually fired the round. So this would definitely be a lethal round. This would be something you don't get up from.
After actor Michael Massey pulled the trigger and shot Eric Draven, Brandon Lee fell backwards instead of forwards as he was supposed to. When the director said cut, Brandon didn't stand up, and the crew thought he was still either acting or kidding around. Stunt coordinator Jeff Amata immediately checked Brandon, who was unconscious and breathing heavily. Medic Clyde Basie went over and shook Brandon, thinking he'd accidentally hit his head during the fall, and didn't think he had been shot since there was no visible bleeding. Clyde took Lee's pulse, which was regular, but within 2 to 3 minutes it slowed down dramatically and then stopped. Brandon Lee was rushed to the new Hanover Regional Medical Center in Wilmington, North Carolina. Attempts to save him were unsuccessful, and after 6 hours of emergency surgery, Brandon Lee would be pronounced dead on March 31st, 1993 at 1:03 p.m. He was 28 years old.
We went to the hospital and we waited around for hours, and then they came out and told us that he'd passed on. It was one of the most horrible things in my life to see that happen and be there.
The shooting would ultimately be ruled an accident due to negligence. Linda Lee Cadwell, the mother of Brandon Lee, would settle her negligence lawsuit against filmmakers of The Crow for an undisclosed sum. Linda had sued the film's producers, Crow Vision Inc., and the Edward R. Pressman Film Corporation, along with several others. Brandon's death led to various conspiracy theories surrounding his and his father's death. Brandon was buried next to his father, Bruce Lee, at the Lakeview Cemetery in Seattle, Washington. Bruce Lee was said to have proudly told everyone about his newborn son Brandon, who Bruce trained in martial arts from a young age. At age 8, after his father's death, Dan Inosanto continued to train Brandon.
I went on to train after my dad's death with his protege, so it was a real nice line to follow for me, because I went on to continue training with the guy who was his senior student.
Later in his teens, Brandon would struggle with his identity, having to train in his father's shadow, which led him to temporarily stop martial arts to focus on soccer, and would go on to be a rebellious high school student. In 1983, 4 months prior to his graduation, Brandon was asked to leave his school for misbehavior and received his GED later that year.
Yeah, the last time they kicked me out, what did they write on the piece of paper? It said that I had a bad attitude towards the educational process and was a poisonous influence upon the minds of my fellow students.
Lee pursued his studies in New York City, where he took acting lessons and went to college majoring in theater. While his main goal was dramatic acting, he credited his skill in martial arts to having helped him get roles. Prior to his death, Brandon had become consumed with his father's written philosophy. In 1990, Brandon met Eliza Hutton. The two moved in together in 1991 and were engaged by October 1992. They were planning to get married in Mexico on April 17, 1993 at sunset, a week after Lee was to complete filming of The Crow. According to Crow Vision Inc., Eliza had also been compensated for an undisclosed settlement amount with the negligence lawsuit Brandon's mother had filed against the filmmakers. After Brandon's death in 1993, Eliza and Lee's mother, Linda, supported the director's decision to complete The Crow. At the time of Brandon's death, the majority of the film was already completed, with only 3 more days of shooting required. Both stunt doubles and special effects were used to complete the film. New state-of-the-art CGI techniques would be used, having the face of Brandon Lee digitally placed on the stunt double. In 1994, The Crow opened up at number 1 in the US. The film would ultimately gross almost $51 million, way above the $23 million budget. It had been the most successful film of Brandon Lee's career. The Crow is considered a cult classic, with the film being dedicated to both Brandon and his fiancée Eliza Hutton.
A building gets torched. All that is left is ashes. I used to think that was true about everything. Families, friends, feelings. But now I know that sometimes, if love proves real, 2 people who are meant to be together, nothing can keep them apart.
I love you.
Say that again.
I love you.
Although his life was brief, Brandon Lee has left a lasting impact on the film industry and will forever be remembered as a loving son, brother, fiancé, talented actor, and martial artist.